My name is Rachel Smith, and I need to tell you what happened 3 weeks before I was supposed to become Mrs. Larry Davis, billionaire's wife. When a single phone call during my final dress fitting changed everything. I had been engaged to Larry for 14 months, and my identical twin sister, Betty, had been my closest confidant through every moment of the engagement. I thought I knew these people better than I knew myself. I was completely, catastrophically wrong. The boutique appointment was supposed to be the highlight of my week. The final alterations on a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people's cars. My wedding planner, Simone, was with me, discussing the last-minute details for the Plaza Ballroom reception, when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I'd programmed under Dr. Stevens, the fake name I'd given my private investigator. I had hired him 6 weeks earlier, after noticing the way Larry's eyes lingered on his phone during our romantic dinners, the way Betty always seemed to know details about Larry's schedule that I hadn't shared with her. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that. I remember my hand shaking as I stepped away from the three-way mirror, still wearing thousands of dollars of silk and lace. I told Simone I needed to take the call privately and walked into the boutique's marble-floored hallway, my reflection multiplying in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. I can still see myself in that moment, surrounded by my own image, looking radiant and hopeful. Miss Smith, I have confirmation. The investigator's voice was flat, professional, emotionless. Your fiancé and your sister have been involved for approximately 7 months. There's more medical records indicate she's 26 weeks pregnant. The timeline aligns with your engagement party in May. The hallway seemed to tilt. 26 weeks meant Betty had been sleeping with Larry since before I'd chosen my wedding colors, before we'd sent save the dates to 300 guests, before I'd signed the ironclad prenuptial agreement Larry's attorneys had insisted on. I could hear Simone calling my name from the fitting room, asking if the bustle looked right, completely unaware that the wedding she'd spent a year planning was based on a lie. I walked back into the fitting room on autopilot, my face carefully neutral. In the mirror, I watched myself smile at Simone and nod at something she said about the cathedral train, but inside, my mind was already calculating, strategizing, planning. The investigator had sent photos to my secure email, time-stamped images of Larry and Betty entering her apartment, Larry's hand protectively cradling her visible baby bump, both of them laughing like they shared the world's greatest secret. And they did share a secret. But what they didn't know was that I was done being the naive fiancé. I wasn't going to cry, scream, or confront. I was going to do something far more devastating. I was going to let them think they'd won right up until the moment I destroyed everything they'd built on my broken trust. And I was going to use the very wedding they were betraying to do it. Standing there in that boutique, surrounded by champagne and congratulations, and the oppressive scent of white roses, I made a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew sweet, trusting Rachel Smith. I would wear this dress, I would walk down that aisle, and I would make sure that what happened next became the scandal that brought Larry Davis's empire crashing down, with my pregnant twin sister buried in the rubble right beside him. The seamstress circled me with a mouthful of pins, humming under her breath as if I were any other bride and not a woman about to marry one of the richest men in New York. Layers of ivory silk spilled around my feet. A small, shimmering ocean pooling on the polished floor. In the mirror, 3 versions of me stared back, each one wearing the same careful smile, the same immaculate hair, the same flawless makeup that Larry's preferred stylist insisted photographed, billionaire ready. Last fitting, Simone chirped from the tufted sofa, her tablet balanced on crossed legs. The plaza has confirmed the crystal chandeliers, the chef has signed off on the 12-course tasting menu, and the guest list is locked at 308. You, my dear, are about to have the wedding of the year. Of course I was. Larry Davis did not do anything small. His name was printed on skyscrapers and whispered in financial columns, attached to words like visionary and ruthless. When he proposed on a private terrace in Santorini, a photographer just happened to be waiting to capture the sunset, the ring, the kiss. Those photos had leaked to a society blog the next day. Nothing in Larry's world was accidental. Chin up just a touch, the seamstress murmured, smoothing the bodice over my ribs. You have such a beautiful neckline. Beautiful. Perfect. Lucky. Those were the words people used when they talked about me now. Rachel Smith. The girl from a middle-class suburb who had somehow landed the city's most eligible billionaire. They did not see the spreadsheets I kept on my laptop. The color-coded timelines, the late nights spent memorizing the names of board members and hedge fund partners, so I would never fumble an introduction at Larry's side. Being Larry's fiancé was a full-time role, one that required flawless performance. Every brunch, every gala, every charity auction was another scene in a show I could not afford to ruin. Even now, as Simone rattled off updates about imported roses and security details, I mentally reviewed tomorrow's tasting with the caterer and the call with Larry's attorneys about the prenuptial agreement. "Are you happy?" Simone asked suddenly. In the mirror, my reflection smiled on cue. Eyes bright, shoulders relaxed. The perfect billionaire bride. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said, and for one fragile, glittering moment, I almost believed it. The fitting room door had barely closed behind Simone when my phone buzzed on the vanity, the vibration sharp against the marble. I was still wearing the dress. The train spilling behind me like a comet's tail as I crossed the room. Dr. Stevens flashed on the screen. The name I'd given the number so Larry would never think twice if he saw it. For a second I considered letting it go to voicemail. Once I answered, there would be no going back to blissful ignorance. No pretending the unease in my chest was just pre-wedding nerves. I pressed accept, anyway. "Rachel Smith," I said, my voice crisp, controlled. "Miss Smith, it's Carter," the man on the other end replied. His tone carried no small talk, no cushioning. "You asked for confirmation. I have it." The air in the room thinned. "Go ahead. Your fiancé, Larry Davis, and your sister, Betty Smith, have been engaged in an intimate relationship for approximately 6 months. My team has gathered photographic, video, and financial evidence of regular meetings at her apartment and at the Four Seasons. Additionally, medical records confirm that Miss Smith is 24 weeks pregnant. I stared at my own reflection in the mirror. Phone pressed to my ear, the words slamming into me one by one. Intimate relationship. 6 months. Pregnant. The bodice suddenly felt too tight. The boning digging into my ribs like a cage. "Whose name is on the medical forms?" I heard myself ask. "Larry Davis is listed as the father. He accompanied her to at least 2 appointments. I have date-stamped photos." The room tilted. 6 months. That covered the Christmas party where Betty had worn the red dress Larry liked. The weekend, sister spa trip, she'd canceled at the last minute. The late-night calls she'd brushed off as work emergencies. "Email everything to the secure address," I said. My voice came out steady, almost bored. "Itemize your hours. You'll be paid in full." Carter hesitated. "Are you alone, Miss Smith?" I looked at the door, at the shadow of Simone's heels moving past. "Yes." "Then I suggest you sit down." I didn't. I stood there, perfectly upright in my perfect dress, every instinct screaming to rip the silk from my body and collapse on the floor. Instead, I watched my expression in the mirror, forced the corners of my mouth into something neutral, almost serene. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," I said. "Your work has been very helpful." When the call ended, the silence roared. On the other side of the door, Simone called my name, asking if everything was all right. I smoothed my hands over the gown, erasing invisible wrinkles, and lifted my chin. "Perfect," I answered, my voice calm and clear. "Everything is absolutely perfect." I changed out of the wedding dress with mechanical precision, unhooking each tiny button, stepping out of the silk like shedding a skin. Simone's voice drifted through the door, something about confirming orchid deliveries, but the words barely registered. My hands moved on autopilot, while my mind spun through possibilities, consequences, strategies. The first instinct was to scream, to storm into Larry's office and throw the evidence in his face, to call Betty and let her hear exactly what I thought of her. But that would give them the upper hand. They would see me as the hysterical, heartbroken fiancé. Exactly what they expected. Larry would deploy his lawyers, Betty would play the victim, and I would be left with nothing but tabloid headlines and pitying glances at the country club. No, that was not how this would end. I pulled on my cashmere sweater and smoothed my hair, staring at my reflection. The truth settled over me like ice water. I had not fallen in love with Larry Davis by accident. I had chosen him the same way someone chooses a stock portfolio, analyzing the returns, calculating the benefits. Security, status, a life where I would never worry about money again. Where doors opened at the mention of my married name, love had been optional, useful, even, but not required. Larry had done the same calculus with me. Pretty enough to photograph well, smart enough not to embarrass him, malleable enough to mold into the perfect billionaire's wife. We had both been playing a game, and I had simply been naive enough to think the rules still applied. But if this was a transaction, then I would treat the betrayal like a breach of contract. And breaches had consequences. I opened my phone and pulled up the investigator's email. Photos loaded one by one. Larry's hand on Betty's rounded stomach. The two of them laughing outside her building. A receipt from a jewelry store. Dated 3 weeks ago. For a bracelet I had never seen. He had used his wealth to seduce my sister, to build a secret life in the shadow of our engagement. Fine. I would use that same wealth to destroy him. The wedding would go forward. Every detail, every plan, every expensive, extravagant flourish. I would smile through the rehearsal dinner and pose for photos and let Larry believe he had gotten away with it, and when the moment was right, when everyone who mattered was watching, I would detonate everything he had built. I walked out of the fitting room with my shoulders back and my face serene. "Simone," I said brightly, "let's finalize those orchids." Larry kept his home office locked, but I had watched him enter the code a dozen times while pretending to scroll through my phone. Muscle memory was a weakness for creatures of habit, and Larry Davis was nothing if not predictable. On Tuesday evening, while he showered after his tennis match, I slipped inside. The room smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, most of the volumes unread props selected by an interior designer. His desk faced the window, overlooking Central Park, a view that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. I sat in his chair and opened the laptop he kept docked there. Password. I tried his mother's birthday first. Invalid. Then the date of his first major acquisition. The screen unlocked. I navigated to his shared drives with the ease of someone who had paid attention during every boring dinner conversation about mergers and portfolios. Larry loved to explain his brilliance, assuming I smiled and nodded without truly understanding. He had no idea I had been taking notes. Financial statements loaded on the screen. Rows of numbers, holdings, investments, spread across offshore accounts and shell corporations. I plugged in the flash drive I'd bought with cash at an electronics store 3 blocks from my gym and began copying files. Tax returns, board meeting minutes, emails with his attorneys and accountants. My phone buzzed. Larry texting from upstairs. "Where are you?" "Kitchen," I typed back. "Making tea. Want some?" "No. Come up when you're done." I had maybe 5 more minutes. I opened his filing cabinet, fingers skimming through labeled folders until I found the one marked Prenuptial Agreement. Smith. My copy was safely stored at my own attorney's office. But I needed to see if there were annotations, notes, anything that revealed his true intentions. There. A sticky note in Larry's handwriting on page 17. Infidelity clause void, if not documented within 30 days of discovery. My stomach dropped. He had built himself an escape hatch, a loophole that would protect him if I ever found out and waited too long to act. But there was something else. A separate document, clipped to the prenup, Davis Holdings, Merger Contingency Agreement. I scanned the dense legal language, my pulse quickening. The merger with Kellerman Industries, Larry's largest deal of the year, contained a morality clause. Any public scandal or criminal investigation would trigger an immediate withdrawal of Kellerman's $800 million investment, plus penalties. I photographed every page. Upstairs, the shower shut off. I closed the cabinet, ejected the flash drive, and cleared the browser history in 12 seconds flat. When I walked into the bedroom, Larry was toweling his hair, smiling at me like I was the only woman in his world. "There you are," he said. "Here I am," I replied, kissing his cheek. Betty arrived at the bridal brunch wearing a flowing cream blouse that did nothing to hide the swell of her stomach. 6 months along, the investigator had said, looking at her now, radiant and glowing in the private room at Le Bernardin. I wondered how I had missed it. "You look exhausted," she said, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was different, something floral and cloying. "Wedding stress?" Completely overwhelmed, I said, letting my voice crack just enough. I don't know how anyone does this. Betty squeezed my hand, her smile dripping sympathy. That's what I'm here for. Sisters, remember? Tell me everything. I played my part beautifully. I complained about the florist who couldn't get the rose color right, about Larry's mother who kept adding names to the guest list, about the pressure of marrying into a family where every move was scrutinized. Betty listened, nodding in all the right places, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Larry's lucky to have you, she said, sipping her sparkling water. No champagne. I noticed. He knows that, right? I hope so, I said, dabbing at imaginary tears. Sometimes I feel like I'm just another acquisition for him. Another asset to manage. Don't say that. Betty reached across the table, her hand covering mine. On her wrist, a delicate gold bracelet caught the light, diamonds set in a pattern I recognized from the receipt in Larry's office. He loves you. I can tell. I stared at the bracelet, my throat tight. That's beautiful. New? She touched it self-consciously. A flicker of something crossing her face. A gift. From someone special. A boyfriend. I leaned forward, eager, sisterly. Betty. You've been so secretive lately. Tell me everything. It's complicated, she said, that smug smile returning. But he takes care of me. Financially, I mean. I finally feel secure. There it was. She had been struggling since losing her marketing job 8 months ago, bouncing between freelance gigs and unpaid invoices. Larry had been her solution, her safety net. She had traded our sisterhood for his bank account, carrying his child while I planned his wedding. I'm so happy for you, I said, my voice warm. You deserve someone who values you. Betty's smile widened. I really do. When she excused herself to the restroom, I photographed the bracelet receipt I'd slipped from her purse and texted it to my attorney with a single word: evidence. When Betty returned, I was smiling, telling her how much I needed her by my side on the wedding day. I wouldn't miss it, she said. Neither would I replied. Monica Chen's office occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of place where discretion cost as much as expertise. I had chosen her specifically because she represented clients Larry's attorneys feared. The kind of lawyer who turned prenuptial agreements into weapons. You're getting married in 9 days, Monica said, sliding the documents across her mahogany desk. And you want to trigger the morality clause at the altar. Not just trigger it, I said. Detonate it. She studied me over her reading glasses, reassessing. When I had first hired her to review the prenup 6 months ago, I'd been the compliant fiancé, nodding along to Larry's terms. Now I watched her see someone different, someone capable of surgical precision. The infidelity clause has a 30-day documentation window, she said. You received confirmation from the investigator 6 days ago. You have 24 days remaining to file. But the merger morality clause has no such limitation, I said. Any public scandal or evidence of fraud triggers immediate withdrawal of Kellerman's investment, plus contractual penalties, totaling $900 million. Monica's eyebrows lifted. You've done your homework. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. Larry's been using shell corporations to hide assets from the IRS. These emails show coordination with offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. If this information reached the SEC, particularly during a high-profile public event, Kellerman would have legal grounds to terminate the merger immediately to protect their reputation. You're not just leaving him, Monica said slowly. You're destroying him. He destroyed me first, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. She clicked through the files, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching admiration. If you release this at the wedding, in front of his investors, board members and business partners, the fallout will be instantaneous. Stock prices will crater before the market closes Monday. The SEC investigation will be inevitable. And the prenup protects me completely, I said. The infidelity clause entitles me to $20 million plus the penthouse. I've already moved my personal assets into protected accounts. Monica leaned back in her chair. What about your sister? What about her? My voice came out cold, flat. She made her choice. She can live with the consequences. 9 days, Monica said, closing the folder. Everything needs to be airtight. It will be, I said, standing. I've been planning this wedding for 14 months. Trust me, I know how to execute a flawless event. Outside, the city glittered below, indifferent and infinite. Somewhere in that sprawl, Larry was closing deals and Betty was shopping for maternity clothes, both of them counting down to a wedding day that would change their lives forever. They had no idea how right they were. The night before the wedding, the penthouse looked like a magazine spread about happiness. White roses overflowed from crystal vases, garment bags crowded the guest room, and a sleek catering team assembled miniature desserts in the kitchen for the rehearsal dinner. Larry moved through it all with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. He slipped an arm around my waist as we watched the sun sink behind the skyline. 24 hours, he murmured, kissing my temple. You ready, future Mrs. Davis? More than ready, I said, resting my head against his shoulder. From this angle, he couldn't see my eyes. Betty arrived late, hand resting on her stomach. The picture of fragile grace. Guests circled her with soft questions and gentle smiles, accepting the lie that she was dealing with health issues that kept her from traveling much. Larry's mother fussed over her like a surrogate daughter, and Betty soaked in every drop of attention, throwing me little looks that hovered between pity and triumph. During dessert, I excused myself, blaming nerves. In the quiet of Larry's office, I locked the door and sat at his desk one last time. My laptop waited in my bag, already loaded with everything Monica and I had curated. The offshore account trails, the falsified expense reports, the email chain where Larry all but dictated how to hide taxable income. The anonymous reporting portal for the SEC glowed on the screen, cursor blinking in the upload evidence field. I attached the encrypted folder, typed a brief, clinical summary of suspected securities, fraud, and tax evasion, and set the scheduled send time for tomorrow at 4:15 p.m. 15 minutes after, I was supposed to be pronounced Mrs. Larry Davis in front of his investors and Kellerman's executives. Next, I opened a new email from a burner account and addressed it to 3 business journalists Larry particularly despised, the ones who had called him reckless during the last market correction. I attached a redacted version of the same files and scheduled that send for the same time. When it was done, a strange stillness settled over me. The die was cast, the fuse lit. All that remained was performance. I closed the laptop, smoothed my dress, and checked my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked serene, almost blissful. In the hallway, I could hear Larry laughing, Betty's softer giggle twining with his. I unlocked the office door and stepped back into the light. Into the party. Into the last night of the life they thought I still wanted. The string quartet shifted from soft background music to the processional as the chapel doors opened and 300 heads turned toward me. Candlelight caught the crystals sewn into my gown, scattering stars across the aisle runner. Cameras rose like a tide, phones ready to capture the moment Rachel Smith became Mrs. Larry Davis. I took my first step, bouquet steady in my hands. Larry waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, jaw set in that practiced, confident smile he wore on magazine covers. To his right, Betty stood in a fitted champagne dress that skimmed over her stomach just enough to suggest, not quite reveal. Her eyes met mine, assessing, sure of her place in this tableau. Each step echoed louder than the music. My heart didn't race, it counted. 14 months of planning, 9 days of execution, 1 precise detonation. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped. The music faltered, then died away altogether. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I heard Larry's mother gasp. The officiant glanced at Larry, confused. Cameras zoomed closer, hungry. I turned, slowly, to face the guests. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "I know you've traveled from all over the world to witness the beginning of my marriage to Larry Davis." A polite, uncertain chuckle rolled through the room. "But there's been a change of plans." Larry took a step toward me. "Rachel, sweetheart, what are you doing?" "Stay where you are, Larry," I said, without looking at him. "You've done enough." I let my gaze drift to the front row, where his board members and Kellerman's executives sat in a glittering line. "Since we're all here, it seems like the perfect time for full transparency. After all, honesty is the foundation of any good partnership, business or otherwise." I turned toward Betty. My twin sister has been incredibly supportive throughout this engagement. So supportive, in fact, that she's been sleeping with my fiancé for the last 6 months. Gasps detonated like fireworks. Betty's face drained of color. Larry swore under his breath. And, as of 24 weeks ago, I continued, they conceived a child together. Congratulations, you two. Really. Using my wedding as the backdrop for your affair was a bold choice. Someone sobbed. A camera dropped. Larry finally found his voice. Rachel, this is insane. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I do, I said softly. I have photos, medical records, financial statements. I have everything. I pivoted back to the investors. You see, when you're engaged to a man like Larry, you learn to read contracts, prenuptial agreements, merger documents, morality clauses. I watched their faces tighten at that last phrase. You learn where the bodies are buried, or, in Larry's case, where the offshore accounts are hidden and how taxable income magically disappears before each quarterly report. A low, dangerous murmur swept through the business row. Phones appeared, fingers flying over screens. Right about now, I said, glancing at the enormous floral arch hiding the discrete screens wired for the reception slideshow. You should be getting alerts. From the SEC, from a few very curious financial journalists, from Kellerman's general counsel. As if on cue, phones around the room began buzzing in unison. One of Kellerman's executives stood abruptly, color flooding his face as he stared at his screen. Another board member turned toward Larry, fury sharpening his features. Rachel. Larry whispered, eyes wide, all his polish stripped away. What did you do? I gave everyone here what they came for, I said. A spectacle, a story, and the truth. At the back of the chapel, the doors opened again. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. They weren't guests, they wore badges. Panic surged through the crowd, shuffling feet, raised voices, the rustle of silk and wool as people stood, desperate to distance themselves from the man at the altar. I took 1 step backward from the aisle, lifting the bouquet from my hands like a burden finally released. This wedding is canceled, I said clearly. The funeral for Larry's reputation, however, is just beginning. Then I turned, gathering my skirts, and walked away from the altar, leaving Larry, Betty, and 300 witnesses standing in the ruins of the life they thought they'd stolen from me. The plaza's service entrance was far less glamorous than the marble lobby, which was exactly why I chose it. No cameras waited there. No curious guests or reporters, just a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, and a bellman who pretended not to notice a bride walking out alone with her veil tucked under one arm. Car's already here, Miss Smith, he said, opening the door. Not Mrs. Davis. Not anymore. My attorney had arranged everything. While florists built arches and chefs plated canapes, wire transfers moved quietly through the system. The prenup clauses I'd memorized had done their work exactly as intended. My accounts were funded, the penthouse title transferred to a trust in my name, my investments insulated from any fallout. By the time I stepped into the waiting town car, I was no longer Larry's fiancée. I was a woman with her own keys, her own money, her own exit. The driver pulled away from the hotel just as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, heading toward the chaos I'd left behind. I didn't look back. Days blurred into a strange, weightless quiet. I stayed in a small boutique hotel downtown, a place where no one read the business pages. I turned off news alerts, kept my phone on silent, learned how it felt to wake up without a schedule built around someone else's empire. The first real update came from Monica. She called from her office, her tone almost amused. Kellerman has officially pulled out, she said. Larry's stock is in free fall. The SEC opened an investigation this morning. He's hired crisis managers, but it's not going well. What about Betty? I asked. A pause. She's still with him, for now. The society blogs are calling her the other woman. Sponsors dropped her brand deals. She's been photographed leaving a clinic in tears. It isn't pretty. I sat on the hotel bed, fingers tracing the stitching on the coverlet. Once, that news would have shredded me. Now it just settled inside me like a closed door. Am I exposed? I asked. You're protected, Monica said. The documents never trace back to you. And even if someone guessed, you didn't commit a crime. You told the truth. After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Same skyline, same glittering towers. But it felt different now. Less like a fortress I needed to conquer, and more like a landscape of possibilities. I thought about the girl who had walked into Larry's world clutching a mental checklist of which fork to use, how to laugh at the right jokes, how to mold herself into whatever the room needed. She had been willing to trade almost anything for security. Almost. In the end, she'd kept the one thing that mattered. I didn't lose a husband that day. I lost an illusion, a carefully curated fantasy of safety built on someone else's money and someone else's rules. What I gained was harder to quantify on a balance sheet. The knowledge that, when pushed to the edge, I didn't break. I planned. I executed. I walked away. On my last morning at the hotel, I packed a single suitcase. No gowns, no borrowed diamonds, no carefully chosen outfits for charity galas. Just the clothes I liked, the laptop holding the life I would build next, and a bank account that no longer depended on anyone's last name. At the lobby desk, the clerk smiled. "Checking out, Miss Smith?" "Yes," I said, sliding the keycard across the counter. "Just getting started. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.